I'm Shawna Rosner, your host of In-House Counsel Chronicles. I'm thrilled to be joined today by Niki Schaefer on our inaugural episode. Niki is Vice President and General Counsel of Reliability First Corporation. Niki received her BA from Cornell University and her law degree from Case Western University. She has been practicing law for 19 years. During her impressive legal career thus far, Niki has worked both in private practice and as an in-house attorney at 2 companies. Niki, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you so much, Shawna. I'm excited to be here.
Excellent. Can you tell us, because I know you'll do a better job, about Reliability First Corporation and your position there?
So I always joke that I have like the longest elevator pitch ever for what I do, but it is kind of complicated. Reliability First regulates the reliability of your electricity on behalf of the federal government. It's basically like an outsourced government function. We are a private company. We are a 501c3, but we are actually funded by your electric bills. So there are 5 other companies across the country that do what we do. And I report all of my work to an oversight body called NERC, and they report that work to FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So it sounds very complicated. It really is the result of the big blackout of 2003. I don't know if you remember that, but prior
I do very well, because my brother got married in Rhode Island that weekend, and remarkably, there were only like 1 or 2 people that didn't make it to the wedding. Some even hitched rides, but yes, I remember it very well. I wasn't actually in Cleveland. We had already gotten to Rhode Island, but yeah.
Very impressive. I was in Canada, so I missed it all. But prior to 2003, there were no laws governing the reliability of our electric power. I think the thought was that the market would take care of that. And I think what the government realized after that big blackout is that it would behoove reliability of electricity if there were laws that utilities had to follow related to it. So now there are a series of laws that relate to like the operation and planning of the grid. So maintaining your equipment, cutting down your trees near big power lines, and then for the cybersecurity of the grid to keep the grid secure. So my company is basically just charged with enforcing those laws. So what we do is like an inherently legal function. So I am the general counsel there. My team has about 40 people, and it's made up of about 10 lawyers and then some paralegal staff, and then about 30 auditors that audit electric utilities in our territory, which is 13 states and DC, to compliance with the laws that govern reliability.
Okay, excellent. When you graduated from law school, did you imagine yourself in a GC position?
Absolutely not. I don't think I really knew what I wanted to do, to be honest. I had a concentration in international law in law school. I was into moot court. I actually interned at what at the time was the newly formed Department of Homeland Security. I was part of their first legal intern program. And
Wow.
I loved doing that. I did that in DC, obviously. I met my husband in my 3rd year of law school. He didn't become my husband then. He went to business school at Case.
Okay.
He works for a family business that's based in Cleveland. And so I thought I would go to DC post law school and continue working for the Department of Homeland Security. But I met him and I decided to stay. So, and that was later in the year, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do at that point. And because I did moot court, I decided maybe I should be a litigator. And that is sort of how my litigation career started. But even when I started as a litigator, I don't think I thought that in-house was my path or that general counsel was my path. That has all sort of happened organically over time.
How did that happen? And by the way, we're glad your husband did bring you and keep you in Cleveland.
Thank you. Okay, so I think before I even start talking about that whole journey, I did want to share that when I think about my path to my job that I have now, which is definitely my favorite job that I've ever had, I think I've been kind of like Goldilocks, like trying stuff out to see what fits and learning what kind of lawyer I want to be and what kind of life I want to live outside the practice of law along the way.
Okay.
And I think that that's different for everyone, but like the questions that we as lawyers should be asking ourselves about our work are pretty universal. So like I said, I started out as a business litigator and I spent almost all of my law firm career at Benesch Friedlander, which was a mid-sized law firm back then, but has become quite a large one over time. And what I realized about being a litigator is that I actually hated trial. I liked almost everything leading up to trial, but nothing stressed me out more than trial. I felt like it was this really theatrical and inauthentic exercise that wasted a lot of people's time and money. And I'm really sorry if I'm insulting litigators here, but it's just how I felt. And I really preferred to settle everything when I could. And then there were like a few really challenging things that happened in the couple of years before I decided to go in-house. I had this nightmare wrongful death case that I was defending in state court in Springfield, Missouri, where the plaintiff lawyers who were totally hometowning us could file a motion and like literally set a hearing on it the next day. And to get to Springfield, I had to fly through Chicago from Cleveland, which is not exactly ideal in the dead of winter. And I have 2 kids, and I was still breastfeeding my daughter at the time. I got mastitis twice because I got stuck trying to get home and I couldn't pump enough. And then the straw that broke the camel's back for me was a 2-week trial in federal court for a case that should never have gone to trial. We had a really excellent winning legal argument, but it was a very technical one and one a jury was really never going to be able to appreciate. And it was little company versus huge publicly traded company and undisputed damages. And there was no way that a jury wasn't going to compensate a highly sympathetic plaintiff, like even if the law was on our side. So I went into that trial knowing that we were going to lose because the client wanted to fight it on principle, which I know is a thing. And then the partner whose client it was, I think sort of encouraged that line of thinking. I did not see my children for 2 weeks. I hardly slept. And the whole time I knew we were going to lose, which is like a really soul crushing endeavor.
Yes.
So a couple days before we got that very unsurprising plaintiff's verdict, a lawyer that I had worked with at Benesch, who had gone to become the GC of a client, which was Reliability First, called me and told me they needed, it's kind of Reliability First version of a head of litigation. And he wanted me for the job. I did not understand what Reliability First did, nor like really what the job was, but I told him that I wanted it and that I would call him after I lost my trial, which would be very soon. And he asked me not to lead with that when the CEO interviewed me. And we kind of laughed about it. So I took that job and I loved it. Okay. And so spoiler alert, it's where I now work as general counsel, although I took a 5-year break from working there and I went to Eaton Corporation. At Reliability First, I think I really learned something about the kind of environment where I thrive. I'm a very competitive person, but really with myself, not with other people. I don't love being in competition with other people at work. And this will kind of come into play later in my story, but I do best in environments where my success is not a threat to someone else's success. And I am kind of a risk taker in the kind of lawyer that I am, and a creative outside the box lawyer and thinker. And I think I'm my best self when I can take a risk, but I don't have to fear the wrath of a client or a partner if I fail. which I think kind of makes me wired for in-house work, like that aspect of my personality. So about 2 years into my job at Reliability First, I got recruited by Eaton Corporation. That's a large publicly traded company in Cleveland. For those listeners who don't know it, they make electrical products. So it was related to my work because it's electricity related, and I certainly understand how that works. So Eaton Corporation had also been a Benish client. So I knew a lot of people that worked there. And at first, I actually said no, thank you, because I thought it was really weird to leave a job that I loved. Like that seemed strange to me. Like when I left Benish, I knew I wasn't loving being a litigator, so leaving made sense. But a lawyer mentor of mine who worked at Eaton and had worked with me at Benish, she really convinced me to reconsider because of the opportunity for growth and advancement and learning that a company like Eaton could give me. I mean, it's a 100,000 person company with a very elite legal department.
Yeah.
And she was right. I saw so much and I learned so much at Eaton, and I am a better lawyer because the time I spent working there. But it came at a price for me. Eaton, like I said, it's a globally publicly traded company. The hours and the pressure and the rules they're really intense. It is the nature of the beast. The mindset that you have to apply to your legal decision making at a publicly traded company is different because you are living and dying by the street and your quarterly earnings. So your shareholders really matter to that decision making. And so then you have, in contrast, Reliability First it's not only a private company, it's essentially an arm of the government. We regulate the reliability of electricity on behalf of FERC. So I don't have operations that I'm supporting in China or Europe or South America, which is, helpful when you're a mom of young kids and want to have a life outside of work.
Right.
Another thing for, listeners to think about is, as a regulator now, which is an inherently legal function, I do the business of my organization as my job. So I am not a cost center like most public companies and many private companies see the legal function, right? Like we just cost money. We don't have a mechanism really for making the company money. We can save them money and we can go after people who owe them money. But that makes a big difference in the space that you occupy in your organization. And I believe in my heart that I am a better general counsel at Reliability First for what I learned in my 5 years at Eaton. I would not be the lawyer that I am today if I had not spent the time there. And I think I met some of the best lawyers and the best people that I've ever worked with in my whole life. And I am still friends with a lot of the people that I worked with at Eaton. But when my CEO at Reliability First, who knew me from my first job, called me about the job opening for general counsel and offered this opportunity to return, at that point in my life, I just knew it was the right call for me.
Sure.
And I went back, and that's how I landed in this job.
That's an amazing, really amazing and unique story, and I appreciate you sharing it so much. A lot of good tidbits in there of advice for our listeners. I can relate a bit to the start of your career in litigation because I don't know if you know that, but I also was a litigator and I felt exactly the same way as you did. I liked everything up to the trial, but the trial, I just felt so out of sorts. Like, this is just not for me. And there's so many people that just thrive on this. And that changed the course of my career. But thank you for the insight you just provided. I'm wondering how your work at Benish impacts at all how you interact with outside counsel now, or how do you interact with outside counsel in your current role?
So I have so much respect for how difficult their jobs are. And I am so grateful it is outside counsel on the front lines and not me, since you've now learned that I hate trial. And
Right.
by the way, my hate of trial, it ran so wide. It wasn't even just the work. Like, I used to stress about my hair because at that time of my life, I would go to work with like wet hair. My hair was longer. I would let it dry naturally. And like, even how early I would have to wake up with the two little kids at home just to do my hair for trial.
I can
I
relate.
mean, everything was a source of stress for me.
Right.
But I have so much respect for what their jobs are, and I try really, really hard to be mindful of their nights and their weekends,
Mm-hmm.
and to be very honest with them about what's actually urgent. Because I think a lot of in-house counsel, and actually just lawyers in general, play pretend on the urgency of things. Like, they act like everything is an emergency. And I try and be very judicious about what I say is actually urgent. I don't pretend that their job is my job or that their work is my work. I really recognize that my role in-house is as a strategist, and it is not to nitpick or second guess their wording or, their day-to-day decisions. I actually try and do that with my own staff too. I really want the people who work with me and for me to feel good about what they do and what they contribute. But I'm also really honest about when something pisses me off. I try not to let the little things piss me off. It's like only the big things. And when those big things happen, I am very honest with my outside counsel about them. But when I find great outside counsel, I am a loyal advocate for them. I am not a nickel and dimer, or someone who wants to create competition between firms. I don't like doing that. I actually don't think that that's time spent productively. And I think, I really believe, and I've seen this play out, that strong relationships with your outside counsel that are built on true mutual respect create a better work product for the company.
Switching gears a little bit, I know that leadership is important to you. You lead both professionally and voluntarily. I know you sit on a few different boards at least. Can you shed light on how you developed your own leadership style?
Sure. My ultimate goal as a leader is to help the people who work for me and with me be the best version of themselves at work and at home. And I base how I approach reaching that goal on what helps me be the best version of myself. So for me, I want a boss who has my back, and who is clear about what they want from me, but gives me autonomy to make that happen, and allows me to take risks in how I go about making it happen, but then who owns my mistakes as if they're their own, like when the time comes. I also demand honesty and transparency. And you may have noticed I'm not really a bullshitter. And frankly, I think that that's one of my superpowers, but it can also be a huge weakness of mine. I have a terrible poker face. And I tend to say what I think, good and bad. And for some people, that can be a total turnoff. What I've learned is that if I establish trust with an employee first, my style totally works. If I don't, my style can be a complete disaster. So I work really hard to establish a rapport with members of my team, and even people outside my team, although sometimes that can be a little harder, so that when I say something critical or negative, it's more likely to be received as me trying to help make them or whatever they're working on better. I don't take credit for other people's ideas or work, because nothing makes me more angry than when people do that to me. I hate it. Like I said, I have a team of 40-ish people, and they do so much. Our auditing function and our whole legal team report to me. They do a lot. And I'm very mindful about those who are actually doing the good work, getting credit for the work that often like gets associated with me because I'm like the face of the work as the general counsel. And then lastly, I think I would say, I think most people who work for me who are talented will tell you that I will go to the mat for them. I am a tireless advocate for those that I value on my team, for their recognition, for promotions, for raises, for them to be able to do the things that they want to do within our organization or outside our organization. Because I have personally benefited so much in my career from other people advocating for me. I just feel like it's my job to sort of pay that forward.
Love that. And I'm sure there's so many people that are impacted positively by that and your leadership style. I want to close by asking you a couple more questions. One, are there any key milestones in your career that you can share?
So I think my whole career and like, frankly, my whole life has been a journey in learning to trust myself and to value my own gut and my own opinion and my own style, like professionally and even like in clothing and accessories. But at the same time, becoming self-aware and humble enough to recognize when I've made a mistake or where I'm weak and can get better. And acknowledging that and owning that and really doing something about it. And, also, as you know, but a lot of people listening don't, I suffered a stroke while I was working at Eaton. And I won't go into details here, and there were so many factors that led to my stroke, some of which were totally beyond my control. Sure. But I would definitely say it was one of the greater challenges I faced in my life. And now that I've recovered, I am very lucky to say that the introspection that it forced on me, so I lost my ability to talk and walk for a period of time. The introspection that forced on me in terms of questioning how I was living and working, I think that made me a better lawyer, a better boss, and honestly, like a better mom and a wife and a friend. I am very intentional about how I spend my time and why in a way that I was not before I had my stroke, which was about 5.5 years ago. And I think that that's something that I and really like everyone else in my life, personally and professionally, have benefited from. And it certainly factored into my decision to leave publicly traded company life because it wasn't, I was just not willing to, I think, put in the time that it would take to do a really good job at that job anymore.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. First and foremost, so glad that you're recovered. To hear the wisdom that you've been able to extract from that experience and share with others and to be an advocate is really something. And I thank you and applaud you for sharing that, not just with us today, but with so many others that can learn from that.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. And lastly, what advice do you have for any of our listeners out there who aspire to be an in-house attorney?
I'm not sure this is unique to aspiring in-house counsel. I think it'd probably be my advice to lawyers in general.
Okay, that's fine.
But I think that, we all owe it to ourselves to take the time to figure out what it is that we love about being a lawyer, assuming that we are capable of loving being a lawyer.
Right.
But I think that the answer is different for everyone. For me, I love problem solving and figuring out ways to get someone to the result that they're trying to achieve. I love learning new things. And I don't just love this. I actually need this one. I need to believe in what I'm doing. Like I'm doing something meaningful, either objectively in the substance of my work or for someone that I care about. So my job now is to make sure your lights stay on. It's literally the mission of my company. So our lives depend on reliable electric power, which is like actually more at risk now than it ever has been. So it's my job to help it be more reliable and secure. And like, that's really cool to me. And then I also get to have a life outside of work, which frankly, I've realized for me is way more important to me than work itself. And I'm happy, even though I'm a general counsel and I'm a mom of 2 ordinary teenagers, I'm happy. That's awesome. So I think that's my advice. Don't think that because you're a lawyer, you can't love your job or you can't have a life outside your job. All of that is possible, but you kind of have to force it to happen. It's not going to happen to you. And I think really the first step is figuring out how you'd like to be spending your time professionally and personally. And then thinking about how you're currently spending your time and really think through like what the disconnect between those two things are and develop a path to get to the place that you want to be. And maybe it is switching from being a law firm lawyer to an in-house lawyer. But even then, I think, as I have mentioned earlier in the podcast, like you sort of have to think about what sort of in-house life you're looking for, because it can be very different depending on where you work.
That's right. That is excellent advice and a great way for us to end. I think that it's not only applicable to all lawyers, you're right, but I think other our listeners as well who might be adjacent to law. So thank you so much, Niki. It's been a pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you for joining me on the In-House Counsel Chronicles podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.